The sun was dipping low over our Austin neighborhood, casting golden streaks across the creek where my daughter Sophie loved to chase butterflies. At 7 years old, with her wide eyes and uncontainable giggles, Sophie was a spark of joy. Her autism making her world a kaleidoscope of wonder and challenges. That day, though, her laughter turned to screams. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old radio for my YouTube channel, MidnightTales, when I heard her cry. My heart stopped. I dropped everything and ran. There she was, sprawled on the creek's bank, her knees scraped, her favorite blue dress torn. Above her stood Margaret Ellison, the HOA president, her face twisted in a scowl. "She shouldn't be here," Margaret snapped, not noticing me. "Kids like her don't belong near the creek." I scooped Sophie into my arms, her sobs shaking, her small frame. She clung to me, whispering, "The mean lady pushed me, Daddy." My blood boiled, but I stayed calm for her. Margaret didn't know I was Sheriff David Morrison. She thought I was just another neighbor she could bully. Back home, I cleaned Sophie's scrapes, while my wife, Emily, tried to soothe her. Sophie's autism made her sensitive to touch and change, and this wasn't just a fall. It was an assault. As I tucked her in that night, her tear-streaked face burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep. Margaret had crossed a line, and I needed answers. I called Mike, my deputy and research wizard for MidnightTales, where I sometimes shared true crime stories from my sheriff work. "Mike, dig into Margaret Ellison. Everything you can find." By morning, Mike's report was in my inbox. It was worse than I'd imagined. Last year, neighbors had filed complaints about Margaret targeting kids, especially those with disabilities. One family said she'd screamed at their autistic son for playing in his own backyard, calling him a nuisance. Another claimed she'd blocked their daughter's school bus because the child, who used a wheelchair, took too long to board. My jaw clenched. Margaret had a pattern, and Sophie wasn't her first victim. She was a predator hiding behind HOA rules, and she'd been getting away with it for years. But not this time. This time she'd messed with my daughter. I started planning. First, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, attaching photos of Sophie's scraped knees and torn dress. I included a statement from Mrs. Jenkins, an older woman who lived across the creek and saw the whole thing from her kitchen window. "I'll testify," she told me, her voice trembling with anger. "That woman grabbed your sweet girl and pushed her toward the bridge's edge. She's a menace." The HOA board promised to investigate, but their response felt lukewarm. Margaret had handpicked most of them, and they weren't eager to challenge her. So I took the next step. I drove to the station and filed an official police report for assault and battery on a minor. I didn't flash my badge or mention I was a sheriff. I was just a dad reporting a crime against his child. Days passed and Sophie's trauma lingered. The creek, once her sanctuary, now terrified her. She wouldn't go near the bridge, even, though she used to spend hours there watching dragonflies. At night, she woke screaming from nightmares, her small body trembling. Emily and I took turns staying up, holding her until she fell back asleep. Her autism made processing the incident harder. She couldn't understand why someone would hurt her when she was just chasing butterflies. We started taking her to Dr. Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in autism. "Sophie's showing signs of trauma," Dr. Martinez explained. "Children with autism often have stronger reactions to frightening events. It may take months for her to feel safe again." Every therapy session drained our savings. Every sleepless night stoked my resolve. Margaret was going to pay. I kept gathering evidence. The Rodriguez family told me Margaret had tried to ban their son, Miguel, who had Down syndrome, from the community pool, claiming his laughter was too loud. Another neighbor said she'd demanded they remove their wheelchair ramp because it was an eyesore. Then I got a copy of the HOA bylaws and read every line. There was no rule against kids playing near the creek. Margaret had made it up to justify her cruelty. Each story, each lie, built a case stronger than the last. I wasn't just fighting for Sophie, I was fighting for every kid Margaret had targeted. 2 weeks later, the HOA called a meeting. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her navy blue suit crisp, her expression smug. She thought she was untouchable. I brought Mrs. Jenkins, other witnesses, and something she didn't expect. Body camera footage from a conversation I'd had with her 3 days after the incident. I'd worn my civilian clothes, no badge, and let her talk. She'd spewed venom, and I'd caught every word. The meeting began with Margaret's version of events. According to her, Sophie was trespassing on restricted creek property and had slipped while Margaret gently escorted her away. Her lies were smooth, rehearsed. Then it was my turn. Mrs. Jenkins spoke first, her voice steady, but emotional. I saw everything from my kitchen window. That woman grabbed Sophie and shoved her toward the bridge's edge. In 20 years here, I've never witnessed anything so cruel. I stood and played the body camera footage. Margaret's voice filled the room, cold and hateful. Kids like that are a burden on society. They make noise, don't follow rules, and drag down property values. Parents should keep them locked up, not let them ruin normal neighborhoods. Gasps echoed. Board members stared at Margaret, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. Her confident smirk vanished, her face paling as I laid out the rest. Neighbor complaints, Mike's background, check exposing her history of harassment in other communities, and the HOA bylaws proving her creek rule was a fabrication. Margaret Ellison has been bullying this neighborhood for years, I said. She targets the vulnerable, and what she did to my daughter is part of a pattern. David Chin, a board member, stood. I moved to remove Margaret Ellison as HOA president. The vote was unanimous. She was not only ousted but banned from ever serving on the board again. Margaret shot up, her face red with rage. You'll regret this, she hissed, pointing at me. I'll sue you all. I stood too, calm but firm, and placed my sheriff's badge on the table. The room went silent. Actually, Margaret, I said, I have something else to tell you. I'm Sheriff David Morrison, and you're going to be arrested for assault and battery on a minor. Her eyes widened, terror replacing her bravado. She'd spent weeks thinking she was intimidating just another neighbor. She was wrong. 2 days later, Detective Sarah Williams served Margaret with an arrest warrant. She was charged with assault and battery on a minor and child endangerment. The story hit the local news, and as Justice for Sophie started trending on social media, fueled by my MidnightTales subscribers who'd followed my sheriff stories. Neighbors shared their own run-ins with Margaret, her cruelty, her lies. Her house became a lightning rod for community anger. Someone spray-painted child abuser on her mailbox. Others left furious notes on her doorstep. Margaret hired an expensive lawyer who tried to spin it, claiming I was abusing my sheriff's authority. But the evidence was airtight. Multiple witnesses, body cam footage, and her documented history. The trial began 6 months later, and the courthouse was packed. Neighbors, disability rights advocates, and reporters filled the seats. Mrs. Jenkins was the star witness, her testimony unflinching. I watched that woman grab a helpless child and throw her off a bridge. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. The body camera footage played, Margaret's hateful words about kids like that, drawing audible gasps from the jury. I testified about Sophie's injuries, physical and emotional. Dr. Martinez explained how trauma lingers in children with autism, how Sophie's fear of the creek and her nightmares were direct results of Margaret's actions. Margaret's defense was a disaster. On the stand, she showed no remorse, doubling down and blaming us. I was protecting that child from herself, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Children with those problems need constant supervision. If her parents had done their job, this wouldn't have happened. The jury saw through her. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, they returned, guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Williams delivered the sentence with steel in her voice. Mrs. Ellison, your actions against this innocent child were reprehensible. You targeted a vulnerable member of our community and caused lasting harm. Margaret got 8 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service with disabled children, and was ordered to pay for Sophie's therapy. As the bailiff cuffed her and led her away, she shot me one last glare. I felt only relief. Sophie was safe, and justice was served. The neighborhood changed after Margaret was gone. Her house sold to the Patel family, whose twin boys with ADHD brought new life to the street. David Chin, the new HOA president, was fair and kind. One of his first acts was to designate the creek as a therapeutic space for kids with special needs. They installed a bench by Sophie's favorite spot, engraved with "A place for all children to find joy and calm." I shared the story on MidnightTales, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments cheering Sophie's strength and our community's stand. Sophie's healing was slow but steady. Dr. Martinez helped her work through the trauma, and her nightmares grew less frequent. The community rallied around us. Mrs. Jenkins organized a fundraiser for Sophie's therapy, and kids drew pictures for her. Miguel Rodriguez, the boy Margaret tried to ban from the pool, gave Sophie a drawing of her by the creek, surrounded by butterflies and flowers. It hangs in her room now, a reminder of kindness winning out. A year later, we held our first Inclusion Day celebration with Sophie as the guest of honor. She sat by the creek laughing as other kids played around her, her fear of the bridge fading. Mrs. Jenkins gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. Margaret thought she could break our spirit by hurting our most vulnerable. Instead, she showed us how strong we are when we stand together. I posted a video of the event on MidnightTales, and it went viral, spreading Sophie's story and our community's transformation far beyond Austin. Margaret failed. Sophie thrived. Our neighborhood grew closer, fiercer, a family that protects its own. I'm a sheriff, but first I'm Sophie's dad. Nobody messes with my daughter, not ever. Now she plays by the creek, fearless, surrounded by friends who love her exactly as she is. Justice isn't just a jail sentence. Sometimes it's a community rising up, a little girl finding her smile again, and a place where every child is treasured. That's the story I'll keep telling on MidnightTales, because Sophie's light shines brighter than any darkness Margaret tried to cast.